All right. It is election day. I do encourage everyone to vote also. Our guest speaker today is someone I've known for, I guess, about 25 years now. And he's made my life easier. We work in the news business, and often the news can be depressing. We cover tragedies and the political climate right now that I personally find depressing sometimes. But I've always been one of those news managers who believes that in that 30-minute window when you're watching a newscast, there should be at least one positive news. And that's why I leaned on this guy for a long time. We start out every morning, and every news operation does this, but with a meeting with the reporters and the producers, and I sit in that meeting and I call on reporters and say, what's your story today? And usually if somebody says, well, there was a shooting overnight, I'm going to track that down. And somebody says, someone from a high school brought a weapon to school or whatever. But when I would call on Alan would say, well, I know this guy, and he's been collecting model trains for the past 50 years. In his basement is the landscape of Eastern Europe, and the trains are going through the mountains and over the hills. And I'm thinking, that's the story I want to see, okay? Alan Williams has been doing positive, uplifting stories about Knoxville in East Tennessee for, I guess, about 40 years. I don't think I can say that about anyone else. He's a part of this community. And anyway, it's been a pleasure to work with him and know him, and here is Alan Williams.
You almost made me cry. Hey, good night, everybody. I'm done. But I want to start by saying, no, I'm not related to Bill Williams or Carl Williams. Some people know Carl from a long time ago in television, or God forbid, Phil Williams. He does say we're brothers from another mother, so that might be close. You are the community's oldest service organization. 1915, World War I was in full swing. A gallon of milk was 36 cents back in 1915. UT in football was 4-4. They won their first game September 25th of 1915. Beating Carson Newman 101-0. So that's kind of, but here's one thing. The downtown Rotary Club and its goals and mission have not changed hardly at all in those 108 years. Still the same, still going strong. Service above self, to inspire, to promote higher education, give back to the community, promote integrity. And with the way our world has become, that's kind of tough. It's a real challenge though. And one thing that I really, really find appealing in my life and others, relationships, especially in business, because you're there 8 hours a day, the quality time of the day. And that's, if you're not getting along and you've got some employees or yourself, you can't mesh, that's going to be tough. So relationships, in my perspective, mean a whole lot. Case in point, congratulations goes out to Covenant Health Center. They've been recognized by Forbes and Newsweek as one of the best employers in the country. This just happened. Let's see, today is the 29th, I think. It happened yesterday or the day before, because of their relationship Now, this came from, the questions were given to employees, and it was anonymous. So there was no brown nosing here to try to build them up. This came from them. And the publications were sent out on a scale from 1 to 10. They asked workers to rate they would ask their workers to rate their employers on that. And that's what relationships are all about in the workplace to me. The key ingredient, of course, relationship. And I can tell from my football background, and I'll get to that in just a minute, those who participated in sports, those who participated in extracurricular, that wasn't about them. It was about a team perspective. It's the way they handle their job, because it's not about them. It's about the whole perspective and the job in and of itself. And I've seen that so many times. And I'm not going to name names at WVLT, but I know exactly in my head who we're talking about. And probably Dave knows the same way too. And just getting along with people, because in sports or in other areas, you don't get too high, you don't get too low. Try to maintain that medium perspective of emotion to get through life, because you know you're going to have the ups and downs. So I've been doing this television stuff for 45 years. And you all the same way. Try to look at every individual here. Every one of you has a story to tell about your life, a story about how you got involved in business. And I'm sure you're going, I can't believe it, because this is not the job that I started, but this is the job I have now. And I'd love to tell how I got there. And so that's where I'm going to start with my life, because I feel like it's extraordinary and I'd like to share that with you. So I grew up here in Knoxville up until the 9th grade. My dad was a teacher. We ended up in South Florida, and I went to high school at Pompano Beach, Florida. Didn't want to move. I was pretty good in high school, and I was offered a number of football scholarships to different schools. There was Alabama, Florida State, Miami, Tennessee at the very end, South Carolina. But the team that was with me all along, up until a 10 o'clock phone call one night, was the University of Florida. And I know, yeah, and I don't mention this too often, because I have gotten some responses. I've gotten almost near bites, and I haven't done anything. One instance, we always wear orange ties or orange on Friday before Tennessee football. I grew up here. I was the kid at the fence that used to circle Neyland Stadium and wanting the sweatbands from Dewey Warren, Richmond Flowers. Those are my heroes. So we'd always wear orange stuff on a Friday. And I went back to my desk, and somebody called me, and I could tell he was hammered. And so he said, you're wearing, and this was before the Florida game, he goes, you're wearing an orange Florida color, aren't you? And he's swearing, and I went, no, man, I'm not doing that. That's not the way I operate. And I finally resolved it, I think, on the phone. So the next day, I was in the press box covering the game, and I'm leaving. And I can't remember what year this was, but it's almost like a movie. I come out the door from the press box, and people just kind of filter to the right and the left. And there's one guy standing there. And that one guy, I didn't know who he was, and he started talking, and I went, oh no, that's the guy. And he's hammered again. And he's in my face, and he's telling me, well, you're not wearing orange. We can't wear orange in the press box. We're supposed to be unbiased here, okay? So he was on me. Finally, I thought I resolved it. There was a cop right behind him, and I think I resolved it. Well, about the time I'm ready to walk away, my wife is hearing this, and she got up there and got in his face. Oh, no, we're going to have a fight. But that's just some of the situations, and many people accept it, of course, and so forth. But anyway, that's I signed with the University of Florida. I was fortunate enough to be drafted in the NFL by the New York Jets as a punter, believe it or not. And so it was there that after I got cut from New York, I moved back to Knoxville. And I didn't know what I was going to do, because in college, if you're drafted, they take you right out of school. And I didn't graduate. and I probably switched majors 5 times. So I didn't have a job. A friend of my dad's kind of took me around. He was in insurance. Do you want to know about insurance? And I went, no, not really. And finally, he knew a general manager of WVIR. And he said, let's go over there. You got to know my background. I was kind of shy. I didn't speak very much, scared to death to get up in front of people. And so what they did is they put me in front of a camera, wrote some script copy, which you don't do in TV. You come prepared. And I read it off a teleprompter. They said, come back if it doesn't work out. Well, I was picked up by the Packers, did very well, but it didn't work out. So I kind of called them back and reluctantly did another audition. I'm hired right off the street with no experience at all. Just think of yourself. You're put in an environment that's technical, that's speaking, that's communicative. And you do it with no experience, and they just say, okay, here you go. Well, it took a long time for me to learn. The sports director at the time didn't really know sports. A guy named Scott Sand, boy, he was good on the air. And so he taught me broadcasting. I taught him a little bit about sports, and we did pretty well. Next year, he took off. They hired Bob Kessling, and see, I still wasn't good enough to be the 6 and 11 o'clock sports guy. So they hired Bob. And Bob and I became such great friends from that. And but here's the thing, it worked out because Bob was gone half the time because he was John Ward's right-hand man. And he did lady ball basketball. So that threw me into the 6 and 11 o'clock news. So it's sink or swim. And so my athletic background helped me a lot because if you can perform in that kind of environment, and I'm thinking, I can do this, I can do this. And of course, there's a lot of prayer that goes in that as well. So that's where I went from WBIR. Then I went, oh, I got to tell you a story about Bob. Bob is one of these that shows up late, okay, in many cases. He's busy at UT, and so I helped put together a sportscast. Well, there was one time when I was running teleprompter. It's a little wheel, and all the scripts are pasted together, and you rotate through that and to the speed of whoever's reading. Well, it was a commercial break, and there's Bill Williams, and there's Margie Ison, and it's a commercial break 2 minutes before Bob's supposed to be on, and he's not on the set. And our newsroom was upstairs, and I heard this clunk, 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 clunk down the stairs. And here's Bob running, and he's got his white shirt and his tie in a plastic bag because he just got them out of the laundry. He hadn't even put them on yet. He's got 2 minutes. So I'm going, oh man, is he going to be caught this time? Finally, he's going to be caught. So here's Bill trying to take out the plastic, and Bob's putting on the shirt, and it's starchy, and he's trying to button it up. And they're counting him down. He's got a minute left. And then he's trying to put on the tie. And it gets to about 15 seconds. And I'm going, you are not going to make it. And at 10, 9, and he's putting on his jacket. And he hadn't even had his tie done yet. He doesn't even have his cuffs buttoned. So he's trying to sit down. 10, 9, 8, 7. And he sits down, 3, 2, 1, and Bill Williams wipes some shaving cream off of his face like that, and he's on. And I went, no! But that's just the way TV is. You do things at the last second, and so forth. But Bob and I have been friends over the years. He nicknamed me Alien, and I call him all kinds of names. We've been friends for over 40 years. I moved to Huntsville, Alabama. To a station there, and knowing how things can go wrong in TV because it's all live. It's like a wheel. You've got your audio, you've got your video, you've got the anchors that have to speak well. You've got everything that has to come together in order to make a good newscast. I was a sports anchor there, sitting next to the news anchor. So there are 2 things going on. Miss America was in town, and the circus was in town. So just think how that could end up if it was a bad situation. So the news anchor says, ladies and gentlemen, meet Miss America. There was supposed to be some nat sound, what we call it. She walks in, meet Miss America. An elephant comes on and goes, And I'm over here snickering, because I think it was really funny. He got so mad, but it's the way things can happen on TV. But one thing also I found out there was, if you mention Alabama, if you mention Alabama football, you better mention Auburn in the same breath. And I learned that from phone calls, because I didn't do that. So I learned that perspective too. So anyway, I was later offered a job at WATE as a sports anchor there. And from there, I left to WIBK Radio to become sports anchor there. And Bob would call lady ball games. And this is one of the highlights of my life. We were calling a lady ball game and the national championship, first national championship we called. He was play-by-play and I was color. And we just looked at each other with about 3 minutes left and went, they're going to win a national championship. And it just, we didn't know what to say, you know. It changed the way he was saying things, the way I was calling it, because we knew that was inevitable. That's just one of the highlights of my life. At that time, I was also hired to do a national network show, which was called Dance Line. I had no idea what I was doing. And then at the same time, I was hired to do a news show at WVLT. So I was doing three things. Something had to go. So I just rounded it up and thought about it. The TV show was canceled, and I went from IBK to just the television, and had been at WVLT for 32 years. And this is a fleeting business, folks. It can change in a heartbeat. And for me to hold on to a job that long, I feel honored to do that in a fleeting business, because you could have a job and fired and for just nothing. You know, sometimes you'll watch and you don't listen to what's going on. You're looking at my tie. You're looking at her dress. You're looking at the way they pronounce words. You don't hear what's going on. So we were talking about this earlier. It's a personality driven situation. And sometimes all the stations could be doing the same story, but why do you watch them? Because you like them. You like the way they present it. You don't like the way they present it, whatever that might be. So we understand that. Let me, and one thing that I wanted to say is, all along the relationships were key there. And let me see what I wrote this down. Okay. One thing that solidified myself with this job is I was going to work one day and I'm making a round on 275 and I get on I-40 and there was a voice that actually I thought spoke to me. Thinking about the job that day and I'm thinking what I'm going to do. And there was a voice that was like sitting in the passenger seat that said, Alan, I know that you do some decent stories and so forth, but what do you really do? And that was as plain as day to me. And really, what am I really doing? And what am I giving back? What am I offering the community? How am I inspiring? Am I making a difference? And that made a difference in me. And you know what? Stories came to me just like that. And to honor WVLT, they were great with it. They could be stories of faith in our community. Who does that in television? You know, in a media market this size, that they accepted that and did that. But it's stories of people and places, and it still comes. And so now I retired 2 years ago, and I started my own company called, really creative here, Alan Williams Entertainment. And what I do is stories. I was asked by some people in the community to do those stories that make a difference. And some of them, I listed a few of them that somebody said, what's the best story you've ever done? One of them was not this, but I got to tell you that because it reminded me. Do you know where Lake Tansy is in the Crossville area? Yeah. Year after year, Johnny Majors would hold a golf tournament there. And he said, I've got a guest coming. I got a guest coming. We said, okay, great. You know, it could be a coach or whatever. So this is in the middle of nowhere, really, Lake Tansy in the Crossville area and around Fairfield Glade. In walks Joe DiMaggio, If you know Joe DiMaggio, he played for the New York Yankees. He was married to Marilyn Monroe, but he's very reclusive. He doesn't do interviews. He doesn't do, I can't believe, I didn't know the relationship that Johnny Majors had with him. So he shows up. So we're sitting at a picnic table. It's not as wide as these tables. And he sits down with me and I've got my little quarter and I'm talking to him. I didn't go anywhere of anything controversial. But I felt like I was Chris Farley talking to Paul McCartney in an SNL segment, you know, remember when you did this? Remember my face, thinking back. But he was so gracious and he just, because nobody he didn't want anybody to interview. He's just quiet about this. And where that cassette tape is today, Dave, I have no idea. I wish I did. But that was one of the most memorable moments. But the segment I've got is Going My Way with Alan Williams. And some of the stories I did. One guy that adopted 8 children here in East Tennessee. He adopted 8 children, yes. An organization also that helps to get convicted criminals, once they leave the prison, they get a jump start on life. And it's called Men of Valor. And they help them. They say the recidivism rate in the state of Tennessee is like 43%. Those that will go back in prison, they say their organization is 15%. And they teach them life skills. They give them a job, but they're requirements. It's a really cool organization. Also, the woman behind the voice of Siri, I located her. And interesting story is she worked 4 hours a day, 5 days a week to record these weird phrases that makes no sense. So she was paid for that. And then one day somebody said, "Is that your voice?" And so she heard it and she goes, "Oh my gosh, Apple never paid for her ever since." So it was just that first week that she got paid. And she lives in Atlanta now and she speaks about this for a living. Interesting person. Another one, how Shields Watkins Field got its name. And it starts right up here in Granger County. Another one, Sakai Ziegler, UT basketball player. I sat down with he and his mother and just tears were shed over how thankful he is to the East Tennessee community about helping him through a GoFundMe process and providing housing after that. And then tonight's story. It's tonight at 4:45, and it'll air about 3 or 4 times during the week. It'll be on Facebook. It'll be on the website. And it'll also be on the YouTube channel I have, Going My Way with Alan Williams. Found this guy. All right. He played in the Army-Navy game in 1943. Some key plays he had. I have the video. I showed that. Then he went in, he had to fulfill his tenure into the military in the Navy. He was on the U.S. Constitution, USS Constitution, and it was hit by 3 kamikazes. And the ship almost blew up entirely, but he survived that with burns. He said, "Alan, that's the last I want to be on a ship." So he became a pilot in the Navy. And every time he was being fired upon or he fired on somewhere else, he would pull out this cross. Well, they showed me that same cross. And then after all, they served him 5 wars. And then after that, he was the executive director of the Orlando International Airport. This guy has lived a life. And he is so smart. And he's got all the wits about him. He's 103. So, and he's also started a retreat. Kids, parents, get them on the right track. It's between Maryville and Townsend. So that's on tonight. And some little things in between that. But I want to leave you with a few things that I found. First of all, advice from an old farmer. Keep your skunks and bankers at a distance. Life is simpler when you plow around the stone. Yellow jackets are considerably faster than a John Deere tractor. Words that soak into your ears are whispered, not yelled. Meanness doesn't just happen overnight. Forgive your enemies. It messes with their heads. It doesn't take a very big person to carry a grudge. You cannot unsay a cruel word. When you wallow with pigs, expect to get dirty. You've heard that. The best sermons are lived, not preached. Most of the stuff people worry about is never gonna happen. Don't judge folks by their relatives. Remember that silence is sometimes the best answer. If you find yourself in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. The biggest troublemaker you'll probably ever have to deal with watches you from the mirror every morning. Good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that comes from bad judgment. Let the cat out of the bag is a whole lot easier than putting it back in. If you get to thinking you're a person of some influence, try ordering somebody else's dog around. Live simply, love generously, care deeply, speak kindly, and leave the rest to God. And finally, your smile is your logo. Your personality is your business card. How you leave others feeling after having an experience with you becomes your trademark. You know that, the person who really has the most influence is that person you see or talk to first on the phone. Because you can either go forward with it or go, I don't want to talk to these people. So that's what I've learned over the years. And what I've also learned is you all are doing some fantastic work with the Rotary Club. Thank you for having me.